Welcome, and thank you for joining Painting with Picasso's Grapevine. My name is Leanna Hahn, and I'm the owner of Picasso's Grapevine in downtown Clarkston. I will be your host and teacher for today. And today we're going to talk a little bit about loose interpretations of a flower, for example. So there's a lot of ways to create a flower. And there is a very specific, hyper-realistic approach, and there's a million approaches in between. So what I'm going to do today is kind of walk through and explain how you can create the image of a flower without necessarily getting too tied up with all the lines. Ours is by far very abstract, and that's the nature of this design of this painting today, but we're going to have some fun with it and kind of give you some examples on how to achieve something like this at home. As always, we always start with our list of supplies, and today I have with me two brushes. I have a very large rounded brush and a very square medium-sized brush. Now, today I was actually anticipating bringing a very tight small brush, but I got here and said, okay, well, number one, I forgot it at home, and then number two, this is kind of a good opportunity to show our audience how to play with your brushes and get different effects. So experiment is what we're going to show you today. Also with me, I have three colors. We have our Nathal Red, we have black, and alizarin crimson. As a reminder, we're working with acrylic paints today, and they dry very fast, which gives you a nice completed painting in a very small time period. The next item we have, as always, is our glass of water and our dab rag. So don't forget, as you're going through and you're washing off your brushes, you want to make sure you dab off your water into your dab rag. Again, you've got this nice, beautiful painting that you worked on. If you have too much water, it can drip down, and at that point, it will rip off your painting. Now, that usually can be fixed, always can be fixed, but you do want to save yourself some time. And as far as utensils, again, I just use a paper plate for placing all of my, my paints on here. And so with that, we're going to get started. So, kind of looking at the composition of this particular painting. So we've got just a really abstract approach of a flower. So I'm going to be starting with the inside and then defining the outside afterwards, which is kind of a different approach. So with this, we'll grab our canvas. This is a 16 by 20 canvas, and I'm going to start with my large round brush, just dabbing it off, getting a little moist into the water. I'm going to choose to start with alizarin crimson and get a little water, just a little bit of water on there. I like to mix the water with the paint on the palette, just so I have a less chance of getting too much water in here and dripping it down the canvas. So what I'm going to do is just kind of get a general outline or figure of my flower. And this is pretty simple. We're just kind of leaving a place mark, really. Just deciding, all right, it's going to be about that size. So then next what we're going to do is we're going to start working on one petal at a time, and the strokes are really just going to be up and down. Again, very loose. Now you'll notice when I place my strokes, I'm really kind of working with putting pressure as I initially touch the canvas, and then I let it flick off and kind of come up. So I do this because I am looking for that kind of rough edge at the top. So it's just an approach or an effect I'm looking to achieve. You don't have to do that. You can make your flower as tight as you like. But this particular painting really is kind of built around the fact that it is extremely loose. So we're going to kind of keep with that. So again, keeping my strokes going up and just kind of getting them out there. Now I'm paying careful attention on where my strokes are ending, because my goal is to make this nice oval outline on the painting. So if I get it and it's not exact, that's fine. Kind of shortening them up towards the end here. And as well, you can choose to do all one direction. You can choose to go back and forth, because we're going to come back in with another layer, and we're going to actually hide some of those starts and stops. I don't know if you can see in the camera here, but if I start in the middle, you're going to see the starts and stops. So we try to avoid that because it just has a more fluid effect. So we just kind of keep going down. Now this particular painting also has some nice dark shadowing in it, And we're going to achieve that by mixing in some of the black while the paint is wet. So I'm moving quickly to go ahead and get that base coat on there because I want that paint to remain as moist as possible to then come in with the next layer. And that's where you get that nice, smooth kind of blended texture. And the key to this is to know when to stop. So I always tell folks, if you keep on blending, you're going to end up with one big muddy kind of gump of all those colors together. What I am looking for is a nice streaky feel. So very technical, streaky. So finishing up. And I've gone outside of that original outline. That outline was just to get my bearings. So I can make these petals bigger, I can make them smaller than the original outline, just however large or small you want to go. All right, so I've kind of got this side done. Now, while that paint is still wet, I'm going to go ahead, mix just a tad bit of red with that naphthalene, or tad bit of black with the naphthalene red. And while it's still wet, I'm going to go in on top of that and create some kind of streaking effects. If you feel like it's going too dark, immediately grab some red, go right over it. This is a super, super simple painting, and it's really just a nice practice exercise on how to achieve some of this nice blending. And you'll hear me talk about blending a lot, especially blending wet on wet. I think you get a lot of really neat techniques, a lot of really neat different effects when you're using the wet on wet. Now you'll notice too, my streaks, as I'm achieving that, I'm kind of letting them go all the way at the top, all the way down to the bottom, because again, I want to erase any of those stops and starts. And there we go. So I like this side. So I'm good with it. So we're going to go ahead and start with the other side. Now, I have a little bit of this black already mixed in with the red, and that's okay because we're going to end up with that eventually. So I'm not too worried about starting with the solid red. And as a matter of fact, you could have even easily started with a nice mixture of the black and red. But I just wanted to show you how to layer on top of while it's wet and get that wet on wet blended feel. So continuing up and down, I may want to go ahead and grab in some of that mixture at this point. And kind of complete it over to the left. Now you'll notice too, as I'm working on this side, this has a little bit darker here. It has, I like that. It has depth and variation. So as you're kind of completing this side, I'm also looking at the other side at the same time going, ooh, I like that. Maybe I want to go back in and add a little bit more depth and variation. So I'm going to go back in here right now while it's wet and add just a few strokes. Again, making sure when you add in those strokes, you allow your brush to go up and down. You don't end up with that stop and start. All right. And don't forget, take a step back, take a look at it. How do you feel about it? Is it looking right? Does one petal need to be a little bit bigger? It doesn't have to be proportionate too. And that's another thing. Don't allow yourself to get so tied into exactness. Again, this is loose. And then the final step that we're going to go through together is kind of creating the definition of the petal after and kind of creating it outside of the petal. There we go. Bringing it down. Kind of looks like a little bit of a butterfly. It can be more rounded, and the petals don't have to be exact shape in comparison to each other. So again, just letting you know that you haven't messed up because this is so abstract. All right, so I've got most of this covered now. I'm going to go in, add a few of the streaks with the black. Moving quickly, I don't want that paint to dry before I get this on. We want that wet on wet. And if I am trying to really do a nice blend, you'll notice my paintbrush, I drag it. I use the top of it, a very light touch. I'm not pressing very hard on this because I want to apply a layer without taking a layer off. All right, so it looks like we have got our base outline of our flower. You know, and again, don't forget, take a step back. Usually, you cannot see your painting when you're right on top of it. Your eyes tend to focus in on a very small part of your canvas, so it really isn't until you take a long step back, usually about 10 feet, and then your eye really kind of concentrates and you can see the whole thing. So the joke is, keep going back, it'll look better the further you get away. So I'm going to go ahead and wash out this particular brush, and for right now I think we're done with the big brush, but we always want to rest your paint brushes in your water because they do dry up pretty fast. Take care of those nice paint brushes. They will take care of you. So this is my experiment brush. Again, I had intended to bring a very small brush, but I thought, you know what, let's play with this one. So this is I find that sometimes these tight brushes, if you use the edge like a pencil, you can actually get a very tightly defined line. So it's just kind of practicing it. And because this is obscure, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start using the edge, but I'm going to allow it to kind of play around on the canvas and just kind of create its own lines. So to do this, I'm going to be using the black. Now, I know my paint is wet right now, but what I would like to do is I'm going to add a little bit of water right into the paint, onto my palette here. And I'm doing that because I'm trying to make this paint a little bit more fluid, so it'll really kind of glide across the canvas. I don't have any background, so that's dried. So a lot of times you'll get very stubbly or kind of the dimpling that shows through. So one of the tips to be able to glide and make a nice solid line is to add water, and then your paint becomes more fluid. All right. So I'm going to start in the middle, and I'll kind of bring back up the original so we can take a quick peek at it. So our original has just some nice little, very abstract, almost like a center of a chrysanthemum, if you would. Not tight, very ambiguous, really. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start in the middle, and we're going to have some very ambiguous little petals. And I'm using, again, the side of this particular brush, and just letting it kind of grow a bit. So we're starting in the middle, and it's very, very, really ambiguous, just vague. Kind of creating and building out. And then we're kind of creating just a little line right around the edge as it grows. Kind of getting further and further out. And I've achieved this with this particular brush. Again, play with your brushes, experiment. This was a nice effect because in some areas it's very tight, and other areas I let it be streaky because I wanted that very, ambiguous outline. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to kind of go through and define where the outside of the paint of the pellet, of the petal of the flower. We're going to go ahead and put that little line there and say, all right, using the edge. And if you're getting some of that dimpling in, that's a good indicator that you need to add some more water. And let's kind of take it around. And we're saying, all right, here is where this flower lives. And you'll notice I'm taking it outside of the red because you can. You can keep it inside. I'm kind of adding a few more layers out and drawing with the side of my paintbrush, again, using it like a pencil. You'll notice too I'm kind of turning it as I bring it down, just kind of playing with the technique. And just defining where that petal lays. And again, take that step back. Take a look at your painting, see how you like it. I'm going to add just a few more lines, just because I find it interesting, just to create And now outside, just a few. To me, it kind of creates motion and depth and just interest. All right, so there's our flower, pretty simple. Hopefully you've gained some tips and some suggestions, and we've taken the scary out of painting. Go home, try this out, enjoy it, experiment with your paintbrushes, and have a good time. Thank you for joining Painting with Picasso's Grapevine.